So first off, I'm just going to start with kind of my process for lighting, how I kind of approach the service, kind of like priorities of how I go through it. So we're starting off first here with like a worship lighting. So how I start with is always front light. So like these lights out here are our front light. For worship in particular, we have usually for each position that like a vocalist is standing in, we have two lights. So if like you stand here, you can see that there's one here and one here. So just kind of hitting two sides of the face. So that's priority one, is always making sure the front light is good. The next thing is that they're not on right now, but those lights up there I'll have as backlights. So they'll just be pointed at their head and shoulders in order to get them to kind of stand off the background. Because if I didn't have backlight, like especially with video, and this is hugely affected by video, because video isn't as forgiving as your eyes. If we don't have backlight, then it might look like your hair just kind of blends back into the blackness back there. And so backlight is a pretty important aspect of lighting, and especially for video. So with like a rule of thumb for front light and backlight is you want to try to get the front light as low as you kind of can, probably like 15 to 20 degrees up, in order to get rid of those black circles around your eyes. If you go like really steep, then you start to get those shadows around your eye and that kind of stuff. So that kind of angle is a good angle to start at. And even having like potentially multiple layers, having one up closer, maybe down, and then one further out. But just getting rid of those raccoon eyes is really important. So with this, I have two positions to kind of light both sides of the face. It's kind of a really standard lighting thing. It's 3-point lighting with 1, 2, and 3 to kind of fill in both sides of the face and that kind of thing. So front light first, backlight second. Backlight, the way I like to have it is that way it's at a position when you're standing here that it's not bleeding onto your forehead. If you start to see that, then it starts to affect like what you see on video. If it's really bright, then their forehead will be really shiny and bright, and you don't want that. You really want kind of a nice halo around their head and their shoulders to help them stand out the background. So you don't want to go too far forward where you're pointing straight down, because then you'll get that on the forehead. Another way to backlight is even like back behind, so we call it like butt light. If you're shooting down from behind, that's another way to backlight somebody, is by putting it down, pointing up at their head. So that's another thing that you can do. So with the front light, again, we tend to like kind of shutter things in. So these lights out here have the ability to kind of cut into the pool of light to be able to control how it comes out of the light, which means that you can say, hey, I want to light this position, but I want to like cut off light here and cut off light here. So that way you don't have as much bleed on the stage. So that's the nice thing about using these types of light, which are called ellipsoidals. They're the ones that we talked about last time with having shutters. It's a kind of that profile fixture, which you have that control. These guys back here are wash lights. And so they tend to just vomit all over what it's pointing at. So there is some amount of control, but not like you can with those fixtures. And so the next thing with worship is kind of mood lights. So once you get those two down, then you can start working on kind of the mood lighting and that kind of stuff. Because one, if you can't see the person, then it's kind of a fail in general. And so really making sure those are good. That's how I always start every cue that I'm building, is with front light, and then start to add color after that. So like these orange ones, those down at the bottom there, and these up there I'll add in after that. And I always usually start with a single color, and that kind of goes off of that mood chart that we talked about last time, with blue being kind of cool and calming, or like amber, which is kind of like warm and fuzzy and just really kind of nice. It's kind of like that sitting by the campfire. Feels really good. So I'll start with one color, sometimes bring in another color, but it needs to like be able to complement and not clash with that color. So I always try to like match my color of lights and that can be different between each fixture. So getting them to all kind of look like the same color is a goal, because sometimes just the way they're manufactured and that kind of stuff, it can tell it to do blue, but it's going to be like different shades of blue. And so kind of trying to get them to match and look like a cohesive, homogeneous like light is what I kind of go for. And then the next thing are texture. So like those ones down there that have like the smaller circle, those are our Mac 500s. Those have like the Gobos in them and prisms and that kind of stuff. Those are what kind of give that texture, different beams and that kind of stuff. So then adding those in there too. So that's kind of my standard like worship lighting approach. You want to go to message lighting. So for message lighting, we kind of go more bland, a little less color. But the way that we do this is we have these 4 lights out here just straight on, pretty wide, and they have a kind of a wider degree spread, and they're all just like overlapping each other. So with lighting, if you point 2 fixtures at the same place, it's going to be brighter. It's kind of like 1 + 1 = 2. Same with like audio. If you take 2 signals that are the same, combine them together, it's going to be louder. And so the reason why I put them out here is that we usually have only been like a 1 camera for capture and for streaming and for IMAG, which is like putting them up on the sides. So like straight on shot tends to be okay. And now that we're doing like multiple camera stuff, I'm probably going to end up adding some side light in order to fill in. So like if you're facing this way, it's nice and even coverage, but if you look this way, I tend to get a little bit dark here. So I might be adding another light to do that. But the nice thing about like this kind of represents like a single fixture, because they're all sort of in the same place, pointed in the same direction. It's all going to look pretty even. Like if I'm walking this way, I'm not increasing in distance. If I walk this way, I'm not increasing in any distance, so my light on the face isn't changing. Now if I do go this way or this way, it does change. So that's why like adding these side ones could potentially be a little problematic, because when they're pacing and stuff like that, they're getting brighter and darker on that side of their face. I have these backlights here, just kind of washing this area and this band. So like our teachers kind of walk in this position here, and they teach back and forth, and just making sure that the backlight has an even coverage over this whole area. So that way when they're pacing, the backlight isn't going up and down as they're walking back and forth. So kind of has some overlap there. And then just back here, just a little bit more filling in kind of the area to make it not so dark. That's kind of my approach to like message lighting. Those are kind of the major 2 facets. And we'll use message lighting for announcements and other stuff like that. So it's kind of going back and forth between those 2. So any questions with that approach and stuff like that so far? Yeah. So pretty basic. It's not too hard. It's just getting down that rhythm of Frontlight has to be killer and backlight just to help. We run our message light for Frontlight brighter than we do for worship, just because we want to make sure everybody can see them. Shows get up well on video. But like for worship, tend to dim them down a little bit just to kind of make them blend. Want to make them seen, but not want to make them stick out. So we run them a little bit less bright. And then that also helps the color and that kind of stuff that's on stage not to get washed out. So, make sense? Cool. So the next thing, we're going to start just walk around. So I'm going to show you a little bit of like our process here. So like when we do lighting, it involves a lot of different things. And so to know kind of the whole process is really helpful in being able to understand and troubleshoot. But then also if you're designing like a Candeo and that kind of stuff, being able to set stuff up and know what stuff is. So when we start, there's like 3 basic things with lighting. You have your control or your console, which is controlling the fixtures. Then you have your distribution, which is basically distributing that control to all the different fixtures. Then you have your fixtures itself. So with each one of those, there's different parts and pieces, but every system is going to have that assortment or those 3 things. And so your console might change. Your distribution is going to be pretty similar wherever you go. And then your lighting fixtures are just by what you have or what you're going to buy and that kind of stuff. So you want to turn on just all the lights now. Then we'll do our walk around. So we're going to walk up to 3rd floor because that's where a lot of the stuff is. So we have our console. We'll probably end there. But we'll start with the distribution of the light fixtures here. So while we're here, actually, let's just talk about our light fixtures. So these are our Mac 250s, which are like intelligent mover lights. They have different colors. They have different Gobos, which are, actually these don't have Gobos, sorry. But they can move, pan and tilt, different colors. We have up here, these purple ones are X4Ss. They're also movers with color. So you can move those, position them, change how wide and narrow the pool of light is. These right here are 6 par 300s. They're just red, green, blue, amber, white, UV, LED light fixtures. So you color mix them together to get your colors. So these are the X4Ss right here as well. You can see how they're on a yoke, so they pan and tilt. Down here, the guys that have the really small opening are the 500s. Down on the floor are the Tri-Tours. And there's really like a couple different fixtures. There's conventional, like these guys. They just have the light bulb in them. The LEDs, which people are most familiar with because you can buy them at Lowe's and stuff. These just have different colors. And then the movers, which are those 500s and these 250s and these X4Ss, just have the ability to pan and tilt and that kind of stuff. So yeah, so that's a basic gist of our light fixtures. We use ellipsoidals and pars for frontlight, backlight and stuff, which are just the like halogen incandescent lamps to be able to get a nice look on their face and that kind of stuff. Color lights like this tend to look a little bit funny on people's faces because of the different colors that you have to mix in order to get there. So yeah, any questions about the light fixtures? There's millions of different kinds that you can buy. And a lot of it is budget determined and stuff like that. But kind of knowing what you're going for, if you're trying to wash or if you're trying to front light, backlight, is helpful in knowing the different kinds. So talked about that a little bit last time. But yeah, so let's walk up to 3rd floor. So you can turn on those lights, Aaron. So these are our dimmers. This is what controls all of our house lights and our front light, that kind of stuff. So if you're using a conventional lamp, you have to have a dimmer to be able to control its brightness. So that's what all these guys are. This is dimmer for the house, and these are all dimmers for all of our catwalks and that kind of stuff. So you can see there's a lot of them, and what that does, it requires a lot of power. So like these guys alone are like 400 amps a piece if you're familiar with like power and stuff like that. So a lot of power used when you're using conventional lamps and that kind of stuff. So that's the nice thing about LED is that you don't use as much power. So you have to be really careful when you're working with lighting because it works with electricity, and knowing how the different fixtures or how much power the different fixtures require. If you can daisy chain them, knowing how many you can daisy chain, because you start to get into issues if you do too many lights on one channel, you'll blow the breaker or you'll blow the light. So understanding those things is really important because otherwise you could lose lights and that kind of stuff. So yeah, the two things about lighting are making sure that you're safe both when you're working with electricity and also safe when you're looking at rigging. And so we'll talk about that in a second when we go upstairs to the 3rd floor about the different ways that we rig and safety when we're rigging. So let's head upstairs. So this is the lighting floor. So this is where we store a lot of our lights, cables, and that kind of stuff, but it's a great place to go because it kind of has everything that we do with lighting. So there's different fixtures. So this again, over here, these are our ellipsoidals. This is what it looks like. It has a barrel on it, which has glass in it like the camera lenses. And you can shape that pool of light. You can either have it be soft on the edges or sharp. These are what you can put gobos in as well. And we have these guys over here, which are zooms that allows you to shrink and contract the pool of light. Down here we have scoops. These guys are like you usually have a halogen like little lamp in there, but these are used kind of for like washing walls and that kind of stuff with colors. You guys have probably, if you've been to any rock shows, you probably have seen these are pars. This is what a lot of like shows that if you go to rock shows and that kind of stuff, they'd have a ton of these. These are the pars that we use. These are Parnells, but they have this lens in here that allows you to shape the pool of light. And then we have, what else do we have? Those are the kind of the basics of our conventional stuff. So with our electrical stuff here, all of our dimmers have this kind of style of connector on it. So I don't know if you guys can recognize this. This type of connector is called a stage pin connection. So a lot of you guys are probably familiar with like an Edison connection. This guy right here. So you guys are all familiar with this. It's just a different style of connector. And so with all of our dimmers and that kind of stuff, they use these stage pin. Tend to be a little bit more rugged. But yeah, and that's more like entertainment, like power and stuff like that. So a lot of times we'll have to like adapt when we're using like different stuff. So we have like different gender changers, and that's what this whole wall over here is. So yeah, again, stage pin connections. So we have this type of cable. Another type of connector is twist lock. And so all of our, a lot of our outlets up here as well have this style of connector, which is, this is a 208 twist lock. It's a little bit bigger, but this is what allows us to get like 208, I think it's like 220 volt stuff up here. There's actually a 110 as well. But there's so many different types of connectors, and just knowing like what the different ones are, it's like, well, I want this to go in a regular outlet, you know, it's for that reason. The nice thing about this is the twist lock, so it actually locks into place. So versus an Edison, it will actually like can tend to pull out of the outlet and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the main connectors. We also have PowerCon. This guy, this is a different type of locking connector, and you can pass that around. A lot of like our LED light fixtures have that style of connector on it. The great thing is it just twists in and locks, so you don't have to worry about it coming out. And sometimes you can even daisy chain them, so they'll have like PowerCon extensions that you can just daisy chain like up to 8 or so light fixtures all in one circuit, which is awesome because then you don't have to like figure out how you're gonna break that out with either one of these bad boys or whatnot. So, so that's PowerCon. Am I missing any other one, Casey? I don't think so. So yeah, that's PowerCon. So knowing those different types is really helpful when you're like designing and putting stuff together. Yeah, IC. You want to grab me one of those cables up there? So this is IC. You guys probably recognize this. It has this connector on it. So this is a IEC cable. I don't know what it stands for. International Electronics something. But a lot of electronics out there use that kind of thing. So, and with power stuff in particular, you have to know like what kind of power the light fixture uses. A lot of them use like 110 or 120, which is like your standard this type of power, so it'll have like this connection on it if it's 110, 120. But some of our lights actually require 208, which is like a higher power requirement than others. And you can't flip-flop them and that kind of stuff.
Also, sometimes we have a few fixtures that have 20 amp connectors with the angled connector. I think there's some sitting right there at the ground there.
Yeah, like this guy is I think it's a 120. 20 amps.
Look at the male end.
It has a winky eye.
See the male end has the, you can see that on that. There.
Yeah, it has like that different style.
Yeah.
So knowing those different things is really helpful, because if you put like a 120 fixture and a 220 or 208, then you'll blow it up. So just understanding like you can't just go and plug stuff in. You have to really know what plugs in. Luckily, a lot of it is 120, like all of our incandescents and that kind of stuff for all that. But just understanding that, because you can blow stuff up. So that's the exciting thing about like our world, is that you can sometimes have fire. And unlike audio, you blow a speaker or something like that. But ours tends to be pretty exciting, for better or for worse. So.
Do you label the 220 specifically?
No, because a lot of the times it's a specific connector. And so a lot of times you can't botch it up because the connector will be that. But once you start getting into stuff like this, where it's changing genders, you're making homemade cables and that kind of stuff, that's where you can tend to get into issue, because you just grab a cable. It's like, oh, this connects into here. Well, this connects into there. And sometimes it's not the case.
Or you have some fixtures that can operate in 120
both.
or 200 amp, like our Mac 250s, for example.
Yeah.
Inside the power supply, there's a switch where you can choose which mode you want to run it in. And then so like we have some twist lock to Edison or twist lock to IEC. Mm-hmm. So if you had like a 220 twist lock to IEC cable and you plug that into like a 120 amp fixture, you're gonna run into trouble. So.
Yep. So knowing those things is really helpful. Another thing is actually, so that's kind of the power stuff. That's all related to power. Did you have that DMX cable up here?
It's sitting down there on that DMX. There's a
DMX at the bottom right.
Yeah.
Okay. So for like all the for all this stuff, it's all controlled via DMX, which is a lighting protocol. The board sends this out over DMX, and so you'll have different connectors, and there is a specific DMX cable. It's a 5-pin, and the cable is actually different from an audio cable. It's 120 ohm, which means that it has more resistance, and DMX is actually a digital protocol instead of an analog protocol like your audio and that kind of stuff. And so it does make a difference, but in reality, you can use an audio cable sometimes for DMX.
Particularly over shorter distances. The longer distances you run them, the more you could run into issues with that.
So this is an audio cable, or it can be DMX as well, but you can see that it has 3 pins, regular like mic cable. This guy is a DMX cable. It is 120 ohm, which if you're familiar with audio stuff, AES runs over 120 ohm cable. So AES audio does that, but this is a 5-pin cable. And you'll see like on some of these, like the colored fixtures that we have down there, sometimes have both. Our 500s actually only have a 3-pin. And so just understanding that there's 2. And you can like adapt them. So you can do 5-pin to 3-pin, 3-pin to 5-pin. It is kind of interchangeable in some ways. The other thing about DMX specifically is that you can only put 32 fixtures on a DMX run. So if you try to put 33 fixtures on it, you'll probably tend to have issues because it's a digital protocol. You can't just split it out or whatnot like you do with audio because it is a digital signal. And so you will put 32 fixtures on a DMX run, or you get a DMX splitter which actually splits it out in a very specific way instead of just like an audio one where you can kind of get a Y cable and it splits it. So that's working with DMX. And DMX runs from the board, it goes to the dimmers that are down there, and we actually have it running out to all these fixtures here. And we have like splitters and stuff in line in order to make sure that the signal doesn't break down as it goes through all those fixtures.
Yeah, back down below we have a box where the cable comes in and then it just like runs all over the place in the auditorium.
Yeah. And not so much anymore, but DMX, sometimes you'll use like a termination at the end of the line in order to like keep the signal at its best and that kind of stuff. So, any question about the stuff up here so far? Okay. So the next thing is kind of like rigging. When we're working with lights, we're usually hanging it over people, and you tend to get into the rigging aspect of it. So like mounting it in different places and whatnot. So that's where rigging safety is really important, because if you don't rig it right, if you don't tighten it down, if you don't have a safety cable, which I'll show you next, you can hurt somebody, kill somebody, and stuff like that. Versus like if you're doing like CG graphics on a computer, you can't really hurt too many people. But with lighting, you have to be careful because you have the potential to hurt people. So probably number one with lighting is we always use a safety cable, unless it's like on the ground. So like all those on the ground, they don't need a safety cable because they're on the ground. But we always use a safety cable and we clip it through the yoke and connect it up over to what it's attached to. So you see these fixtures over there? What we'll usually do out there is actually put a safety cable going through the yoke and up over that pipe. And that is in the case that if that connection were not to be tightened down or were loose, the safety cable would catch it. So safety is very, very important when you're talking about lighting and other stuff too, but lighting tends to be more of an issue because you're changing lights, you're putting lights up, you have volunteers that don't know what they're doing. And so sometimes I'll go through and just double check safety cables to make sure that they all have safeties, they're all connected, because sometimes some will get overlooked. I've even missed some before, and I'll make sure that they're connected. A lot of the times it's not an issue. If you tighten it down, you make sure it's nice and tight, but the safety cable is just a secondary thing to make sure that you don't have any issues. So another thing with rigging is that there's different styles. So here we have catwalks. It makes sense. You're able to walk on them. Like in our box in the South Auditorium, we have things called electrics, which are just pipes with electricity running to them. And you have to get on a ladder or something like that in order to hang lights to it. So this is a catwalk. Electrics is that. So those are two things that you can rig lights to. Is like we rig them to our rails here, or the electrics have the pipe. There's other ways you can do it too. You can actually do truss and motors, which is what those 6 powers are connected to. We'll walk over there in a second. Or there's pipe and base. Pipe is like that. And you can do chains and that kind of stuff in order to get it at the right height. Or there's this thing called a cheese burrow, which is a really fun thing to say. But what it does is it allows you to put a pipe on one side and then connect it to another pipe here. So you can kind of create a grid or stuff like that with cheese burrows. So you can pass that around. There's two different styles. There's a swivel or a 90, which basically gives you a 90-degree way to fix it. So, and that's where, like, if you're working with catwalks and that kind of stuff, it's pretty easy to, you just put your light on there. But when you start looking at rigging and creating set designs and stuff like that, safety is a very important thing. I can't stress that enough, just because if you don't rig it right, if the thing that you're connecting, like the truss and motors, the pipe to up above, isn't rated for that type of load, it could fall, break down. There's people underneath of it. And so always make sure that you understand what you're doing when you're rigging stuff and putting stuff above people's heads. So any questions with that kind of thing? We'll walk over there and look at some more of that kind of stuff. But
Do you do anything to isolate any of the pipes from vibration? Or is it just
not usually, no. If it's pipe and clamp like that, it tends not to be as much of a thing. Because vibrations you can't really see in lighting as much. Sometimes with like truss and motors, it'll swing. A lot of times it weighs enough that it's not going to swing too much, but there's the potential, like HVAC turns on and stuff can kind of sway a little bit.
coming loose over time?
Not usually. And luckily with that kind of stuff, it's actually designed for clamping pipes and stuff like that. So you're not trying to like go to Lowe's and piece stuff together in order to get it to hang and stuff like that. So any questions there? So we'll walk over here, walk out to the catwalks. Here's our catwalks. We have 5 of them, 2 on stage and then 2 on the other, or 3 on the other side. You can see the pipes that we're actually mounting the lights to are right there, and they all have safety cables. We have different DMX runs, so Cody can point out where the DMX is over there. So we have different ports there that actually allow us to run like DMX cables, like down the different catwalks. Actually, there's a run right underneath of you there that runs back down behind the curtain down to these lights. So that allows us to do like these types of fixtures. You can see here is the truss and motor. So you can see that truss there with those lights on it, and then the motor chain running up to the beam there. And then we have beam clamps that actually attach to these beams. And then we're able to connect that chain to it. And the motors are nice because you can actually just with a switch like motor up and down and get it into the position where you want it. And with any of this kind of stuff, you have to understand like how much load it's going to put on the building. So like this truss here doesn't have much weight on it, but if you were to put really heavy stuff on it, you could hurt the roof. It could come loose because these chains are only rated for like 500 pounds. So if you put 700 pounds on it, you're at risk of causing the motor to fail, that kind of stuff. So understanding those rigging aspects is really important when you start to think about this kind of stuff. A lot of times, like with, week-to-week type stuff, you're not really having to do that. But like if you ever see anybody just trying to do stuff, you have that gut check where it's like, is that safe? Is that designed for that? Is it able to handle that load? All those things to consider now that you know. So the more you know, right? So we'll walk out kind of to the catwalk out here. So yeah, this is our catwalk. This is where a lot of our front light is hung. And so if you look at these lights in front of you, you see that they're attached to these handrails, which are all welded and designed to take this kind of stuff. But hopefully if you look, there's a safety cable there too. So make sure that there's safety cables. So with this light out here, the way that we'll focus it is we'll do different pools of light. So for like, if we have 4 vocalists downstage, we'll have 4 pools of light. We actually have 9 to be able to do our different varieties of like 2-person, 3-person, 4-person, and that kind of thing. Yeah, we just determine where people are standing, and then we'll actually focus lights. And so, like with this type of fixture, you want to just solo this one and turn off the house lights and stuff. So with this light fixture here, it's one of our zooms, and so that gives you the ability to actually shrink and grow the pool. So if you look here, I can actually adjust this, but as you can see, the wider it gets, the dimmer it gets. The tighter it is, the brighter it gets. So these zooms allow you to do that. Another thing is being able to adjust the edge. So you can get soft or you can get sharp. So we tend to go sharp. So like if we had vocalists down center, we potentially make sure that they're all in there. And the brightness will be determined by how wide the field of light is. So sometimes we'll even like make it wider in order to get the brightness that we would want. Instead of just tightening it in as much as you can, because with conventional light fixtures, if you tend to dim them, it'll actually adjust the color temperature. So the goal is to run the light fixtures at full and then adjust what you need to from there, either by different degrees. So like this adjusts from a 19 degree to a 36 degree. And by doing that, if we adjust it out, it gets dimmer, and so we can get it potentially to where we want it. And then we can shutter it by using these shutters here. And then control it that way. So that's the zoom here. So the goal is to run them at 100% because of color temperature. And then pick the degree fixture that we want. So you can turn on the catwalk lights at full there, Aaron, please. So these ellipsoidals down here have a fixed degree in them. So I think these are 19 degree fixtures. So that means they're going to have a fixed pool of light. And distance will adjust how bright they are. But another thing that you can do to actually change how bright they are is use an ND filter. Just like in video, we use ND filters to cut the amount of light that goes into the sensor for video. Here, we adjust how much light comes out of the light by using ND filter. All of our front lights for worship actually have a filter in it in order to drop the brightness down for our worship vocalists and that kind of stuff. So our message lights all have a diffusion filter in it, which just helps to soften up the image and that kind of thing. But yeah, all of our front light for worship has an ND filter in it. So,
adjust the temperature of the light, like you were saying.
Yep. So we want to run them at full, And then for Frontlight, Backlight, it's not as important. But Frontlight is, especially with video, because you set your white balance, color temperature on the cameras. And if you are at 50% on these lights, they'll look a lot more orange because the color temperature of the light is less. Like we were talking about back there, we use ND filter. This is an ND filter. This cuts your light output of the light, so you're able to run it at full. You can just pass it around. It just looks gray. So it's called a neutral density filter, so it doesn't actually change the color that's coming out of it, just how much.
But you can hold it up to the light and you can see how much it like kind of lessens the light.
And there's different gels for different amounts. They're called, yeah. So another thing with like using conventionals and that kind of stuff is that sometimes you'll have to use color correction gel. So like if you're shooting outside and you'll have two competing like color temperatures. And so you'll adjust the front light if you're using like an LED wall, or if you just want artistic change to be able to do that. So we'll use things called CTB filters, and there's actually another one called CTO. So for conventionals, you use a CTB filter, which basically makes it more blue to match more like daylight, like the sun and that kind of stuff is a cooler temperature than our warm white conventional fixtures. So that's what this is a CTB filter, and so you can kind of see how that would adjust the light as well. Another thing that we can do is actually do gobos, and like the conventionals and our 500s have gobos in it as well. They're just different patterns on sheets of metal or even glass that when projected or when put in the light, it'll project that image. So for this light, you actually, it's like just a little piece of tin or whatever. And then you'll have a gobo holder. And what you do is you'll put it in the holder. And then it goes in this slot right here. So it'll go in like that. And so once you get that in there, then you're able to adjust the focus, which is the barrel slides in and out in order to get that sharp edge and that kind of thing. Another thing about this is that it kind of works like a mirror, is that it'll be upside down or backwards or stuff like that. So just understanding that you have to sometimes twist the gobo in order to put it in the right position or be able to read it. So that's a gobo here. So another thing with these lights, you can do colored gels and that kind of stuff, and that's all. You put them in a gobo or a gel holder like this. This one's actually too big for this light, but you put it in here like this, and then it'll go into the slot at the front of the light like this. So this one's actually designed for the PARs over there, and then these ones are a little bit smaller. But that's how you're able to like affect the light as well, just by gels and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, for like these types of light, we tend to use just like the CTB or the ND filters like Cody has here, because a lot of our color is done by the LEDs and they don't need gels, which is nice because you don't have to change them and stuff like that. But if that's what you have, you use gels in order to change the color and stuff like that. The thing with these types of light, they don't do as good with blue. Like if you remember back to our last class, this has a warm white color. And so toward the blue side of the spectrum, it's not able to replicate that as well. So red's really good in this kind of light, blue is not so great. And this is the lamp for these guys. And so if you guys are ever changing lamps in these types of lights, you have to be careful not to touch the end of it, because your oil will potentially like cause it to break and that kind of stuff, because the oil will get hot and then cause the bulb to burst. These guys are really exciting to hear when they burst because they make a huge, loud explosion. So just because the heat and stuff like that. So there's the filament in there. If you ever see you you'll obviously know if it's burnt out. Sometimes it'll just burn out, the filament will just fall apart. But it has this style of connector. Just goes in this housing here. But yeah, always just make sure that you're touching the base. Like even when I'm actually changing it, I'll leave it inside of here like this and just pull the foam back like that in order to put it into the light fixture. So we have a ton of these guys. You can pass that around. So that's what that's what we use for a lot of our conventional fixtures, for the pars, the ellipsoidals, the zooms. I'll use that style of light fixture. And that's just your regular, like, conventional halogen incandescent lamp. So not too crazy there. It's hard to forget. It gets really hot. So like even when we're out there, the light will be on for an hour, something like that. We'll use gloves in order to handle the fixture because it will get very hot to the touch. That's another nice thing about LED is that they don't get as hot. So they make LED versions of this that are just as bright and that kind of thing that don't require as much power, and you can actually daisy chain them together, and they don't put off as much heat. So. Yeah, so this is actually metal, which is designed to help dissipate that heat. So the heat energy from the lamp will actually get passively cooled through the aluminum fixture. So, yeah. Another thing about power requirements, so like these guys all have 575 watt bulbs. So that guy is actually a 575 watt bulb. So, you know, it's going to be, your light bulb at home is going to be 60, maybe 75, 100. So this is going to be 5 times plus more bright than that.
We have a few thousands floating around too. We have used those just to get some extra.
These are actually 750 watt
Okay.
bulbs. So they take even more power.
Yep. So there are two different versions. This light fixture in particular has this nice 750 on the side here, so it tells you it can take up to 750 watts. So that's another thing about power to consider when you're putting light fixtures together. How many fixtures do you think of this you can put on one circuit? Any guesses?
We're talking a 20 amp.
On a 20 amp circuit, yeah. So there's math involved, which is really fun to do. Or at most, with the 575 watt bulb, you can put 3 of these on one circuit and be safe. So with a 20 amp circuit, you need to leave about 20% of extra in there in order to keep from like blowing your circuit breaker or tripping your circuit breaker and that kind of thing.
Volts, you're talking.
So that's another thing with conventions. You need to consider like what type of lamp you have in it. You can put 3 of these on one circuit safely. 4, you're probably going to trip the circuit. Or if you had one of these, you put 1 on a circuit because this is a 1,000 watt bulb. So knowing that is really helpful. The nice thing is they make these guys in like 100 watt, 120 watt versions. So you can put a lot of these type of fixtures, if it's an LED fixture, on a circuit with no problem. But these guys, you have to be careful. And even with like, we have some portable dimmers, which you can buy, they're just like little whatevers. You can only put like maybe 2 or 3 of them on that because it is the way that the dimmer is built. Yeah, sometimes I think I've seen like dimmers that are 15 amp dimmers and stuff like that. So with those, you'd only probably be able to do 2 fixtures. So a lot of your like household outlets will be 20 amp sometimes, but sometimes they are 15. So you have to make sure that you look into like how much power does that outlet have. And also if there's 2 outlets on the wall, like that outlet, they might be together. So you can't just plug them in together because that's the same circuit. So just be careful of that too. Make sure that they're separate circuits. So, well, the nice thing about LED is it makes this kind of stuff a lot easier because you don't have to worry about it as much. So, yay technology. But cool. Well, thanks guys. Hopefully this was helpful and informative. And yeah, really thanks for coming out today and excited to our next time. We'll do boards next time. So.